I should have known better than to buy a house in Meadowbrook Heights, Illinois. But the place had everything I wanted: a 3-bedroom colonial with a finished basement, a decent yard. And it was only 20 minutes from downtown Chicago, where I worked as an electrical engineer. My name is Ethan Shepard, and when I signed those closing papers in October 2025, I had no idea I was walking into a nightmare wrapped in cheerful suburban aesthetic and governed by the most militant homeowners association in the Midwest. The trouble started on a freezing January morning when I woke up to find my beautiful antique lamppost lying in 3 pieces across my front lawn. I had installed that lamppost myself just 2 months earlier, a gorgeous wrought iron fixture with beveled glass panels that cost me nearly $2,000. It was a reproduction of an 1890s gaslight design, and I had spent an entire weekend digging the foundation hole, running electrical conduit, and making sure everything was perfectly level and up to code. The thing was built to withstand tornado-force winds, and yet there it was, snapped off at the base like a toothpick. I pulled on my boots and coat, trudging through the 8 inches of fresh snow that had fallen overnight. The temperature was somewhere around 15 degrees, and my breath came out in thick clouds as I examined the damage. Deep tire tracks carved through my lawn, and the story became immediately clear. The HOA snow plow had come through during the night, and the driver had misjudged the turn into my cul-de-sac. Instead of staying on the street, he had driven straight across the corner of my property, taking out my lamppost and leaving deep ruts that would take months to repair once the ground thawed. I took probably 50 photos with my phone, documenting everything from multiple angles. The tire tracks were unmistakable. They came from a large truck with chains, exactly like the plow the HOA contracted every winter. I even found pieces of orange paint scraped onto the broken metal base of my lamppost, paint that matched the HOA plow perfectly. My phone rang before I even got back inside. It was Deborah Patterson, the president of the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association, and her voice had that particular quality that made me think of fingernails on a chalkboard. "Mr. Shepard, I am calling to inform you that your lamppost was not in compliance with HOA guidelines," she said without any preamble or greeting. Section 12, Paragraph 9 of the Community Bylaws clearly states that all decorative lighting fixtures must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee before installation. You never submitted the proper paperwork. I stood in my foyer, dripping melting snow onto the hardwood, trying to process what I was hearing. "Deborah, your plow driver just destroyed my property. I have pictures showing the tire tracks going right through my yard." "That is irrelevant to the compliance issue," she replied, her tone clipped and precise. "However, I will pass along your concerns to our snow removal contractor. Have a pleasant day, Mr. Shepard." She hung up before I could respond. I stared at my phone, feeling my blood pressure rising. I had dealt with Deborah exactly 3 times since moving in, and each interaction had been progressively more irritating than the last. The woman was 52 years old according to the neighborhood directory, had never worked outside her home, and apparently devoted every waking hour to making life miserable for the 140 families in Meadowbrook Heights. She had already sent me violation notices for leaving my garbage cans visible from the street past noon on collection day, for planting flowers that were not on the approved plant list, and for parking my work van in my own driveway for more than 3 consecutive days. I called the snow removal company directly. After being transferred 3 times, I finally reached a manager named Pete who sounded exhausted. "Yeah, I heard about the lamppost thing," Pete said with a heavy sigh. "Look, my driver Craig said he never hit anything, He swears he stayed on the street the whole time. I have photographs, I said firmly. The tire tracks go directly from the street across my lawn right to where my lamppost was standing. There is orange paint from your plow scraped onto the broken metal. This is not ambiguous. Pete was quiet for a moment. Can you send me those photos? I emailed them immediately, and within 5 minutes Pete called me back. Okay, I see what happened. Craig is new and he was probably going too fast. He should not have cut that corner. What do you need from me? I need your insurance information, and I need compensation for the lamppost, the electrical work that was destroyed, and the lawn restoration I am going to need in the spring, I said, pulling out my receipts from the lamppost installation. The fixture itself was $1,800. The electrical conduit and materials were another $300. I spent $200 on specialty concrete for the foundation. Professional installation would have cost at least $800 in labor, which I did myself. Plus I am going to need at least $500 worth of topsoil and sod to fix those ruts. I am looking at $3,600 total. Pete whistled low. That is a fancy lamppost. It was, I said flatly. Let me talk to Craig and my insurance company. I will call you back by tomorrow, Pete promised. But tomorrow came and went with no call. I tried reaching Pete 4 times over the next week, and each time I got his voicemail. My emails went unanswered. Meanwhile, the broken lamppost sat in my garage, a testament to what happens when you try to add a little elegance to a neighborhood run by petty tyrants. The second violation notice from Deborah arrived on a Tuesday. This one informed me that I had 7 days to remove the unsightly ruts and damaged areas from my front lawn, or I would be fined $50 per day until the issue was resolved. The notice made no mention of the fact that her contracted plow driver had caused the damage in the first place. I drafted a carefully worded letter in response, detailing the incident, attaching copies of my photographs, and requesting that the HOA take responsibility for the damage caused by their contractor. I sent it certified mail with return receipt requested, and I copied it to every single board member whose address I could find in the neighborhood directory. Deborah called me that same evening. Your hostile and accusatory letter to the board was completely inappropriate, she said, her voice tight with anger. We have investigated your claims and determined that the HOA bears no responsibility for damage to unapproved decorative fixtures. The lamppost is not the only damage, I said, forcing myself to stay calm. Your plow driver also destroyed my lawn. That has nothing to do with whether the lamppost was approved or not. Our contractor has assured us that no such incident occurred, Deborah replied. If you continue to make false accusations, we will consider it harassment and take appropriate action. The board expects you to repair your lawn within the specified time frame. Good evening, Mr. Shepherd. Another abrupt hang-up. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my phone and feeling a cold knot of anger settling in my stomach. I had always tried to be a reasonable person, someone who followed the rules and worked within the system. But Deborah Patterson and her HOA board were not interested in reason or fairness. They were interested in control, and they clearly believed they could bully me into accepting responsibility for damage I had not caused. I spent the next 3 days doing research. Illinois has specific laws governing homeowners associations, and I discovered that HOAs are legally required to maintain common areas in a safe condition. More importantly, they can be held liable for damage caused by their contractors if those contractors were acting as agents of the HOA. The snow removal contract was between the HOA and Pete's company, which meant the HOA was potentially on the hook for everything Craig had destroyed. I also learned that Illinois law allows homeowners to pursue small claims court cases for up to $10,000. $3,600 fell well within that limit. I could file the paperwork myself, represent myself at the hearing, and if I won, the HOA would be legally required to pay. But first, I decided to try one more time to resolve this like adults. I drafted an invoice on my computer, making it look as professional as possible. I itemized every single cost, attached copies of my receipts, included the photographs showing the damage, and added a brief but firm cover letter explaining that I expected payment within 30 days. I sent copies to Pete's snow removal company, to Deborah Patterson personally, and to the HOA board via certified mail. The response from Pete came first. His email was apologetic but firm. After reviewing the incident with our driver and our insurance company, we have determined that Craig was following the instructions provided by the HOA regarding snow removal routes. Any claims for property damage should be directed to the Meadowbrook Heights HOA. We consider this matter closed. In other words, Pete was throwing the HOA under the bus, and I could not really blame him. He had a contract that probably included an indemnification clause protecting his company from liability. Smart. The response from Deborah took another week and came in the form of an official letter on HOA letterhead. The board had reviewed my invoice and rejected it in its entirety. According to their letter, I had violated multiple community guidelines, including the installation of an unapproved fixture and the failure to maintain my lawn in acceptable condition. The letter concluded with a warning that I now owed the HOA $700 in accumulated fines for the lawn damage, and that amount would continue to increase by $50 per day until I fixed the ruts. I had to read the letter 3 times before I fully absorbed what they were trying to do. They were not just denying responsibility, they were actively trying to make me pay them for damage their own contractor had caused. It was so audacious, so completely divorced from reality that I actually laughed out loud. That night, I filled out the paperwork for small claims court. I included every email, every photograph, every receipt, and every piece of correspondence with both the snow removal company and the HOA. I filed the case against the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association on a Friday morning, paying the filing fee with a credit card and requesting a hearing date as soon as possible. The clerk told me I should expect the hearing to be scheduled within 60 to 90 days. I also did something else that Friday. I called Craig directly. It took some detective work, but I eventually found his cell phone number through a friend who worked in municipal services. Craig was 24 years old, recently married, and working 3 different jobs to make ends meet. When I reached him, he sounded nervous. "I did not mean to hit your lamppost," Craig said immediately. "Pete told me not to talk to anyone about it, but man, I feel terrible. It was my 2nd week on the job, and I was trying to go fast because Mrs. Patterson kept calling Pete saying we were not clearing the streets quickly enough. I came around that corner, and the plow just caught the edge of your lawn before I could correct. I thought maybe I just clipped some snow, but when I checked my mirrors, I saw the lamppost was down." "Why did you tell Pete you did not hit anything?" I asked. Craig was quiet for a long moment. "Pete told me if I admitted it, I would lose the job and probably get sued. He said snow removal companies get blamed for stuff all the time that is not their fault, and I should just deny everything. I needed the job, man. My wife is pregnant and we have got medical bills stacking up. I know that does not make it right, but I was scared." I felt some of my anger deflating. Craig was just a kid trying to survive, caught between his employer and a vindictive HOA president. Did Deborah Patterson specifically tell you to plow faster? I asked. She called Pete at least 5 times that night, Craig said. She was screaming at him about how we were not keeping up with the snowfall and she was going to cancel the contract. Pete told me to double time it, hit all the streets even if the snow was still coming down. I was rushing and I screwed up. I am really sorry, Mr. Shepherd. I appreciate you telling me the truth, I said. Would you be willing to put that in writing? Another long pause. If I do that, I will definitely lose the job. Craig, you hit my property and then lied about it. I understand why you did, but I am now in a situation where the HOA is trying to fine me hundreds of dollars for damage you caused. I need the truth documented, and honestly, if Pete is telling you to lie about accidents, that is not someone you want to work for anyway. He sighed heavily. Yeah, you are right. Okay, I will write it down. Can I email it to you? That would be perfect, thank you. Craig's email arrived that evening. It was simple and direct, laying out exactly what had happened the night he destroyed my lamppost. He admitted that he had been driving too fast, that he had cut the corner too sharply, and that he had known immediately that he had hit something. He also confirmed that Deborah Patterson had been pressuring Pete to plow faster, and that Pete had told him to deny hitting the lamppost. Craig ended the email by apologizing again and offering to testify if needed. I printed the email and added it to my growing file of evidence. The small claims hearing was scheduled for March 12th, which gave me just over 6 weeks to prepare. In the meantime, I ignored the increasingly hostile letters from Deborah. She sent me 3 more violation notices, each one threatening larger fines and even a lien against my property if I did not pay what I owed. I responded to each one with a brief email stating that the matter was now in litigation and all communications should be preserved for the court. The neighborhood was split on the conflict. I learned this during a chance encounter with my next-door neighbor, Marcus, who worked as a high school teacher and had lived in Meadowbrook Heights for 8 years. Deborah is out of control, Marcus told me one Saturday afternoon when we both happened to be checking our mail at the same time. She has been getting worse every year. Last summer she tried to fine the Johnsons because their tomato plants grew too tall and violated the fence height restrictions. She argued that since the plants were staked and supported, they counted as temporary structures. It was insane. Half the neighborhood is terrified of her, and the other half is too apathetic to vote her out. Can she actually be voted out? I asked. Technically, yes. The board elections happen every May. But Deborah runs unopposed every single year. She has 2 other women on the board who basically just agree with everything she says, Linda and Sharon. They are both in their 60s, and they have been friends with Deborah for decades. The other 4 board positions turn over sometimes, but they never have any real power because Deborah controls the votes. Someone needs to run against her, I said. Marcus laughed. Be my guest. I did 6 years ago, and Deborah started a whisper campaign that I was trying to turn the neighborhood into a rental property zone so I could profit from investment homes. Completely made up, but enough people believed it that I lost by 20 votes. She is vicious when challenged. I thanked Marcus for the information and went back inside, but his words stuck with me. Deborah Patterson was not just a nuisance, she was a bully who had been allowed to run unchecked for years. The Lamppost incident was not an isolated power trip. It was part of a pattern of behavior that had been damaging the entire community. February brought more snow and more problems. The Plow came through again during another storm, and this time I watched from my window to make sure Craig did not repeat his mistake. He stayed carefully on the street, but I noticed he was going significantly slower than seemed necessary, probably traumatized from our previous encounter. Deborah must have noticed too, Because the next morning there was a new notice posted on the community bulletin board at the entrance to the neighborhood. The notice informed residents that, due to ongoing performance issues, the HOA would be seeking a new snow removal contractor for the following season. I felt a stab of guilt for Craig, but reminded myself that this situation was not my fault. Pete's company had a responsibility to handle the incident professionally, and they had chosen to lie instead. Craig had participated in that lie, even if he had been pressured into it. Sometimes consequences are unavoidable, even when everyone involved has understandable reasons for their actions. The small claims hearing finally arrived on a Wednesday morning. I took the day off work, dressed in a suit and tie, and brought 3 copies of everything, one for me, one for the judge, and one for whoever the HOA sent to represent them. I arrived at the courthouse in downtown Skokie at 8:30 for a 9 o'clock hearing, my stomach tight with nervous energy. Deborah arrived at 8:55 with a lawyer. I had not expected that. Most people represented themselves in small claims court, and the presence of an attorney suggested Deborah was taking this very seriously. The lawyer was a man in his 40s wearing an expensive suit, and he carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my damaged lamppost. We were called into the courtroom at 9:15. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Patricia Holbrook, and she had the tired, no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had presided over thousands of these cases. She reviewed the file briefly, then looked up at both of us. "Mr. Shepard, you are claiming $3,600 in damages caused by the defendant's snow removal contractor. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said, standing up perhaps a bit too quickly. "And Meadowbrook Heights HOA, represented by attorney Gerald Foster, you are disputing liability. Mr. Foster, what is your defense?" The lawyer stood smoothly. "Your Honor, the HOA maintains that Mr. Shepard installed an unapproved decorative fixture in violation of community bylaws. Additionally, the HOA's contractor has stated unequivocally that no contact was made with the plaintiff's property during snow removal operations. We believe Mr. Shepard is attempting to hold the HOA responsible for damage that may have been caused by other factors, such as high winds or improper installation." I felt heat rising in my face, but I forced myself to stay quiet until the judge addressed me. "Mr. Shepard, do you have evidence that the HOA's contractor caused the damage?" Judge Holbrook asked. "Yes, Your Honor, extensive evidence." I approached the bench and handed her my organized folder of documents. "I have photographs showing tire tracks from a large plow vehicle crossing my lawn and leading directly to the broken lamppost. I have measurements showing that those tracks match the wheelbase of the plow truck used by the HOA's contractor. I have a written statement from the driver admitting that he struck my lamppost. I have receipts documenting all costs associated with the lamppost and its installation. And I have a copy of the snow removal contract between the HOA and the contractor, which establishes that the contractor was acting as the HOA's agent." Judge Holbrook spent several minutes reviewing my documentation. Attorney Foster tried to interject twice, but she held up a hand for silence. When she finally looked up, her expression had shifted from neutral to distinctly unimpressed. "Mr. Foster, you said your contractor denied hitting the lamppost. Mr. Shepard has provided a written statement from the driver admitting fault. Would you like to address that discrepancy?" Foster looked uncomfortable for the first time. "Your Honor, I was not aware of any such statement. May I review it?" The judge handed him Craig's email. I watched Foster's face as he read it, seeing his professional composure crack slightly. He whispered something to Deborah, who was sitting ramrod straight in her chair with her lips pressed into a thin line. "Your Honor, I need to consult with my client," Foster said. "You have 5 minutes," Judge Holbrook replied. "Court is in recess." We filed out of the courtroom into the hallway. Foster and Deborah moved to a corner and had an intense, whispered conversation. I could see Deborah's face turning red, and her hand gestures were becoming increasingly agitated. After about 3 minutes, Foster walked over to me. "Mr. Shepard, my client is willing to offer a settlement of $2,000 to resolve this matter," he said in a low voice. "The damages are $3,600, I replied. "I have receipts for everything." "Your lamppost was not approved by the HOA. That reduces your recovery." "No, it does not. The HOA does not get to destroy my property just because I did not fill out the right forms. If Deborah had an issue with my lamppost, the proper remedy was to send me a violation notice and potentially fine me through the HOA's established procedures. She does not get to send a plow driver through my yard as an enforcement mechanism." Foster's mouth twitched. "That is not what happened here, and you know it." "Then why is your client offering to settle?" He studied me for a moment, then shook his head. $3,200, final offer." $3,600, I said firmly, "plus a written apology from Deborah and removal of all fines she has tried to assess against me." "That is not going to happen." "Then I will see you back in front of the judge." We returned to the courtroom. Judge Holbrook listened to Foster's argument that the damages should be reduced because of the lamppost approval issue. And then she listened to my counter-argument that the HOA's right to regulate decorative fixtures did not extend to destroying them. She took another few minutes to review the photographs and receipts, and then she delivered her ruling. "I find in favor of the plaintiff, Ethan Shepard, in the amount of $3,600. The evidence clearly shows that the defendant's contractor caused the damage, and the contractor's own written admission removes any doubt about liability. The HOA's argument regarding approval of the lamppost is irrelevant to the question of who caused the damage. The defendant will pay the full amount of the judgment within 30 days. Additionally, I am ordering the HOA to rescind any fines assessed against Mr. Shepard related to this incident, as those fines were retaliatory and improper. Are there any questions?" "No, Your Honor," I said quickly, before Foster could respond. "Court is adjourned." I walked out of the courthouse feeling lighter than I had in months. Deborah stormed past me without a word, her face still red, with Foster trailing behind looking distinctly uncomfortable. I drove home, stopped at a nice restaurant for a celebratory lunch, and spent the afternoon wondering if this would finally be the end of my conflict with the HOA. It was not. The next violation notice arrived 4 days later. This one informed me that my mailbox was not in compliance with HOA standards because the post had a minor crack near the base. I took a picture of the mailbox. The crack was barely a 1/4 inch long and completely superficial, and emailed Deborah to point out that this was clearly continued retaliation for the court case. Her response was brief. "The HOA has a duty to maintain community standards. The condition of your mailbox violates Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the Community Bylaws. You have 14 days to replace it." I called Marcus that evening. "I need to know how to run for the HOA board," I said. "Are you serious?" Marcus asked, though I could hear approval in his voice. "Completely serious. Deborah is not going to stop, and someone needs to challenge her. When are the elections? Candidate registration opens April 1st. You need to get 25 signatures from neighborhood residents on a petition, submit it to the current board, and then all the candidates are voted on during the annual meeting in mid-May. You want me to help you campaign?" "I want you to run with me," I said. "We can form a slate." Run against Deborah and her friends, promise to bring sanity back to the HOA. You told me half the neighborhood is fed up with her. Let us give them a reason to actually vote. Marcus was quiet for a moment. My wife is going to think I am crazy. Probably. Are you in? Yeah, he said finally. Yeah, I am in. Let us do this. We spent the next 3 weeks going door to door through Meadowbrook Heights. It was exhausting work, especially while maintaining my full-time job, but we met dozens of people who had their own horror stories about Deborah. There was the family who had been fined for having a playground set that was 6 inches taller than the bylaws allowed. The retired couple who received a violation notice because their grass was cut to 2.5 inches instead of the required 2 inches. The single mother who was threatened with a lien because she put up Christmas lights 3 days before the approved decorating period. Every story made me angrier, and every conversation convinced me that we were doing the right thing. By the time April 1st arrived, Marcus and I each had over 50 signatures on our petitions, double what we needed. We submitted them to the board together, standing in Deborah's living room while she reviewed the paperwork with barely concealed fury. Your petitions are in order, she said coldly. The elections will be held on May 15th at 7 p.m. in the community clubhouse. All candidates will be allowed to make a 3-minute statement before the voting begins. We look forward to it, I said pleasantly. The campaign was brutal. Deborah sent out a newsletter to the entire neighborhood warning about radical candidates who want to eliminate all community standards and turn Meadowbrook Heights into a chaotic free-for-all. She organized a telephone tree where her supporters called residents to spread rumors about Marcus and me. I heard through various neighbors that we were supposedly planning to allow commercial businesses to operate out of homes, that we wanted to eliminate all restrictions on fence heights and paint colors, and that we were both being paid by developers who wanted to buy up properties and build apartment buildings. None of it was true, obviously, but we had to spend valuable time and energy combating the misinformation. Marcus created a simple website laying out our actual platform. Reasonable enforcement of genuinely important rules, an end to petty violations and harassment, transparent financial management of HOA funds, and a review of all bylaws to eliminate outdated or overly restrictive provisions. We printed flyers and held 2 town hall meetings in the community clubhouse, both of which were well attended. The night before the election, Deborah made her final move. Every resident received a letter describing the Lamppost incident from her perspective. According to her version, I had installed an illegal fixture. It had fallen down due to my poor workmanship, and I had then fraudulently blamed the HOA to avoid taking responsibility. She claimed I had manipulated the court system and coerced Craig into lying about what happened. The letter ended with a warning that if Marcus and I were elected, we would run the HOA into the ground with frivolous lawsuits and reckless spending. I was furious, but Marcus talked me down. Let her flail, he said. People are not stupid. They have seen how she operates. This letter is just going to remind everyone why they are tired of her. The annual meeting on May 15th was packed. The community clubhouse could hold maybe 200 people, and every chair was filled with at least 50 more standing in the back. I saw faces I recognized from our door-to-door campaign, but I also saw plenty of Deborah's supporters, older residents who had been in the neighborhood for decades and seemed genuinely convinced that Marcus and I were going to destroy everything. Deborah spoke first, delivering a speech about tradition, standards, and protecting property values. She was actually a compelling speaker when she wanted to be, and I could see some people nodding along with her points. Linda and Sharon gave similar speeches, emphasizing their experience and commitment to the community, When my turn came, I kept it simple. I moved to Meadowbrook Heights because it seemed like a great place to live, and it could be a great place to live. We have good people, nice homes, and a real sense of community. But that community has been damaged by years of petty enforcement and selective application of rules. I am not running because I want to eliminate standards. I am running because I think we can have reasonable standards without constant fear and harassment. We can maintain our property values without threatening people over Christmas lights. We can preserve the character of our neighborhood without measuring grass height with a ruler. If you are tired of being afraid to check your mailbox because there might be another violation notice inside, I hope you will vote for Marcus and me. We will work for all of you, not against you. The applause was loud, though not universal. I saw Deborah's face tighten, and she whispered something to Linda. Marcus gave a similar speech, emphasizing his 8 years in the neighborhood and his track record as a reasonable person. Then the voting began. It was a simple paper ballot system. Each household got 1 vote, and the top 3 vote-getters would serve as board president, vice president, and secretary. The other 4 board positions were also up for election, but those candidates were largely unopposed and uncontroversial. The vote counting took nearly an hour. Marcus and I stood in the back of the room, both of us too nervous to sit. I kept trying to read the faces of the volunteers who were tallying the ballots, but they maintained professional neutrality. Finally, the treasurer, a mild-mannered accountant named Robert who had somehow remained neutral through the whole campaign, stood up to announce the results. For board secretary, Sharon Mitchell received 73 votes. For board vice president, Marcus Chen received 89 votes. And for board president, Ethan Shepard received 92 votes. The room erupted. About half the people started cheering and applauding while the other half sat in stunned silence. Deborah looked like she had been slapped. She stood up abruptly, grabbed her purse, and walked out without a word. Linda and Sharon followed her, though Sharon at least had the grace to look embarrassed. People swarmed Marcus and me, shaking our hands and congratulating us. I saw tears in the eyes of the single mother who had been threatened over Christmas lights. An elderly man named George gripped my shoulder and said, "Thank God. Maybe now I can enjoy my retirement instead of worrying about violation notices." The victory felt surreal. I had come to Meadowbrook Heights just wanting to live quietly in my house, and now I was president of the HOA. It was not a responsibility I had sought, but as I looked around the room at all the relieved and happy faces, I felt a sense of purpose settling into place. The transition of power was supposed to happen immediately. According to the HOA bylaws, the new board took office as soon as the election results were certified. Robert handed me a thick binder containing all the HOA financial records, contracts, and administrative documents. "You are going to want to review everything carefully," he said quietly. Deborah kept control of most of the information. I only saw the financial statements quarterly, and even those were usually summarized. That comment sent a warning signal through my brain. "What do you mean, summarized?" Robert shifted uncomfortably. She would give the board a 1-page overview of income and expenses. When I asked for detailed records, she said it would take too long to compile and that we needed to trust her financial management. She has been president for 11 years, and most board members just went along with it. "Did you ever push back?" I asked. "Once, 3 years ago. She accused me of questioning her integrity and threatened to have me removed from the board for cause. I dropped it because honestly I do not need the drama. I just wanted to help the community." I thanked Robert and took the binder home. That night, I sat at my dining room table and started going through every document. The HOA collected monthly dues from all 140 households, $200 per month, which worked out to $28,000 per month, or $336,000 per year. That was a significant amount of money, and it should have been more than enough to cover snow removal, lawn maintenance of common areas, insurance, and administrative costs. But as I dug deeper into the financial records, things stopped making sense. The HOA had paid Pete's snow removal company $12,000 for the most recent winter season, which seemed reasonable. Lawn maintenance was another $15,000 annually. Insurance was $8,000, but there were dozens of other expenses that I could not quite track. Consulting fees of $40,000 paid to something called Heritage Property Management. Office supplies totaling $8,000. Administrative costs of $60,000 with no itemization. Legal fees of $35,000, which seemed high for an HOA that rarely dealt with actual legal issues beyond the occasional lien. I started making notes, flagging items that needed further investigation. By 2 in the morning, I had identified at least $150,000 in questionable expenses over the past 3 years. Some of it might have been legitimate. I was an engineer, not an accountant, but my gut told me something was seriously wrong. The next morning, I called Marcus. "We need to hire a forensic accountant," I said without preamble. "What did you find?" he asked. I spent 20 minutes walking him through the financial records. Marcus had a sharper eye for this kind of thing than I did. He had taught economics before switching to history, and he immediately spotted additional red flags I had missed. "Heritage Property Management," he said. "I will bet you anything that is a shell company. And these administrative costs are absurd." "What administration?" "Deborah sends out violation notices and runs meetings. That should not cost $60,000 a year." We scheduled an emergency board meeting for that Saturday, inviting all 7 board members, including the 4 whose positions had not been contested. I also invited Robert to attend since he had been handling the finances. And I made one more call to an attorney named Michael Rodriguez, who specialized in HOA law and had been recommended by a colleague at work. The meeting was tense from the start. Sharon attended and tried to maintain a veneer of professionalism, but Linda called to say she was resigning from the board effective immediately. Deborah did not respond to any of our communications at all. I presented the financial information I had found, and Michael helped walk everyone through the legal implications. "If money has been misappropriated, this could constitute embezzlement," he explained. Illinois law requires HOAs to maintain accurate financial records and to make those records available to homeowners upon request. If Mrs. Patterson has been concealing information or diverting funds for personal use, she could face both civil and criminal liability. One of the other board members, a woman named Patricia who worked as a nurse, looked shaken. "I had no idea any of this was happening. Deborah always said the finances were in good shape, and she had all this experience managing the HOA. I just trusted her." "That is what she counted on," Marcus said. "The question now is what we do about it." Michael had already anticipated that question. "My recommendation is to hire a forensic accountant to conduct a full audit of the past 5 years of financial records. That will cost the HOA somewhere between $8,000 and $12,000, but it is the only way to know the full extent of the problem. If the audit uncovers evidence of embezzlement or fraud, you will need to report it to the police and consider filing a civil suit to recover any misappropriated funds." The board voted unanimously to proceed with the audit. Michael connected us with a forensic accounting firm in Chicago, and they started work the following week. In the meantime, I froze all HOA expenditures except for essential services like snow removal and lawn maintenance. We also changed all the passwords and banking access to prevent Deborah from doing anything with the accounts. That decision prompted the first of what would become many threatening letters from Deborah's attorney, not Gerald Foster, who apparently wanted nothing more to do with this situation, but a new lawyer named Cynthia Brooks, who specialized in aggressive litigation. The letter accused me of overstepping my authority, improperly interfering with HOA operations, and defaming Deborah without evidence. It demanded that I resign as board president immediately and threatened to sue me personally for damages. Michael drafted a calm response explaining that the board had the authority and responsibility to investigate financial irregularities, and that no defamatory statements had been made. He also pointed out that if Deborah had nothing to hide, she should welcome the audit as an opportunity to clear her name. The audit took 6 weeks. During that time, life in Meadowbrook Heights was strange and surreal. About half the neighborhood supported what Marcus and I were doing, seeing it as necessary accountability. The other half viewed us as troublemakers who were attacking a woman who had devoted years to the community. There were heated arguments at the grocery store, and someone spray-painted Judas on Marcus's garage door in the middle of the night. But there were also small victories. We implemented a new violation notice process that required warnings before fines, and we suspended enforcement of several of the most ridiculous bylaws pending a full review. People started relaxing, taking pride in their homes without constant fear of retribution. The neighborhood began to feel like a community again, instead of a prison yard. The forensic accountant's report arrived on a Thursday afternoon in late June. I read it twice, feeling sick to my stomach, and then I called Marcus and Michael for an emergency meeting. The news was worse than I had imagined. Over the past 5 years, Deborah had systematically embezzled approximately $270,000 from the HOA. Heritage Property Management was indeed a shell company she had created it herself, and had been paying consulting fees directly into an account she controlled. The administrative costs were largely fictional, with receipts either forged or inflated. She had even been paying herself a salary of $24,000 per year, despite the fact that HOA board positions were supposed to be volunteer roles. The report laid out everything in excruciating detail, including bank records showing transfers from the HOA account to Deborah's personal accounts, credit card statements showing personal purchases made with HOA funds, and documentation of the shell company creation. The forensic accountant had also uncovered that Deborah had taken out a line of credit in the HOA's name, secured against the community clubhouse, and had used that money for personal purposes as well. "This is going to destroy her," Marcus said quietly after reading the report. "She destroyed herself," I replied, though I felt no satisfaction in saying it. "We need to go to the police." Michael agreed. "This is criminal conduct. The HOA needs to file a report, and the state's attorney will decide whether to prosecute. You also need to file a civil suit to recover the stolen funds, and you will probably need to notify the homeowners about what happened." We reported the embezzlement to the Skokie Police Department on Friday morning. The detective who took the report, a patient woman named Sarah Walsh, reviewed the forensic accounting report and immediately elevated the case to the Financial Crimes Unit. She explained that embezzlement cases involving this amount of money were taken very seriously, and that the investigation would likely take several months. "Does Mrs. Patterson know you are filing this report?" Detective Walsh asked. "Not yet," I said. We wanted to notify the police first. Good. We will send officers to speak with her this afternoon. I would recommend that you and Mr. Chen stay away from her entirely. Let us handle the investigation and keep all communication going through your attorney. We followed her advice. That evening, Marcus and I drafted a letter to all Meadowbrook Heights residents explaining what had been discovered. We kept it factual and unemotional, laying out the audit findings and explaining that the matter had been reported to police. We also assured everyone that the HOA's insurance policy would cover most of the stolen funds, and that we were taking steps to implement financial controls to prevent this from ever happening again. The neighborhood exploded. Within hours of the letter going out, my phone was ringing constantly. Some people were grateful we had uncovered the theft. Others were angry that we had pursued the investigation. A few accused us of fabricating the whole thing as revenge for Deborah's enforcement of community standards. It was exhausting and emotionally draining, and I started to understand why people often chose to look the other way when faced with evidence of wrongdoing. But there was no going back now. The police investigation moved forward, and I learned through Detective Walsh that Deborah had initially denied everything, claiming the audit was fraudulent and that Marcus and I had conspired to frame her. But when confronted with the bank records and her own signature on documents, her story had changed. She now claimed that the HOA had authorized all the payments and that any confusion was due to poor record-keeping rather than intentional theft. The state's attorney's office apparently did not find that explanation compelling. In August, Deborah Patterson was arrested and charged with multiple counts of embezzlement, theft, and fraud. The bail was set at $50,000, which she posted, and her trial was scheduled for the following spring. The arrest made local news. Several reporters contacted me for comment, and I gave carefully worded statements explaining that the HOA board had discovered financial irregularities and had done their legal duty by reporting them to authorities. I declined to speculate on Deborah's guilt or innocence, though privately I had no doubts. The civil suit to recover the stolen funds was filed in September. The HOA's insurance policy covered $100,000 of the loss, but we were still out $170,000 plus the cost of the audit and legal fees. Our attorney argued that Deborah should be required to repay everything, plus interest and attorney fees, and that her home could be seized and sold if necessary to satisfy the judgment. Deborah's attorney filed a motion to dismiss the civil suit, arguing that the HOA had not properly exhausted its internal remedies before going to court. Judge Holbrook, the same judge who had presided over my Lamppost case, denied the motion with barely concealed contempt. The defendant is accused of embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from the organization she was supposed to be serving. There is no internal remedy for criminal conduct. The motion is denied, and this case will proceed to trial. Life slowly began to normalize in Meadowbrook Heights. Marcus and I worked with the other board members to revise the bylaws, eliminating or modifying many of the most oppressive rules. We implemented a new system for financial oversight with multiple checks and balances. We hired a professional property management company to handle administrative tasks, ensuring that no single person would ever again have unilateral control over HOA funds. And I fixed my Lamppost. I bought an even nicer one this time, a beautiful copper fixture with hand-blown glass panels that cost $2,400. I installed it myself on a crisp October morning, taking my time to do everything perfectly. And this time, I submitted the proper architectural review paperwork, which was approved by the board, including me, at the next meeting with 0 objections. Craig called me in November. He had lost his job with Pete's snow removal company shortly after testifying about the Lamppost incident, but he had found a better position with the city's public works department. His wife had given birth to a healthy baby boy, and they were getting back on their feet financially. "I just wanted to thank you," Craig said. "I know losing that job sucked at the time, but you were right. Pete was not someone I should have been working for, and if I had kept lying about what happened, it would have eaten me up. So, thank you for pushing me to tell the truth." "You are welcome," I said, "and congratulations on the baby." "Thanks. Hey, I heard about that whole embezzlement thing with your HOA president. That is crazy, man." "It has been quite a year," I agreed. Deborah's trial began in March 2026. I attended several days of testimony, watching as prosecutors laid out the evidence of her theft. Her defense was weak and contradictory. She alternated between claiming the money was legitimate compensation for her work, arguing that she had made innocent bookkeeping errors, and suggesting that other board members had authorized the payments. None of it held up against the documentary evidence. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Deborah was sentenced to 6 years in prison, with credit for time served, and was ordered to pay full restitution of $270,000 plus interest and legal fees. The judge's comments during sentencing were scathing. "You held a position of trust in your community, and you betrayed that trust in the most calculated and selfish way imaginable. You stole from your neighbors. You manipulated and bullied people who questioned your authority. And when you were caught, you showed no remorse and no willingness to take responsibility for your actions. This court hopes that your time in prison will give you an opportunity to reflect on the harm you have caused." I felt no triumph watching Deborah being led away in handcuffs. She had brought this on herself through years of greed and arrogance, but it was still a sad end to what could have been a life of genuine community service. If she had simply done the job honestly, she would have been respected and appreciated. Instead, she had thrown everything away for money. She had not even needed court documents, revealed that she and her husband had substantial savings and no significant debts. The civil judgment was easier to collect than we had expected. Deborah's husband, who had apparently been completely unaware of her embezzlement, agreed to a settlement that included selling their home and turning over most of their liquid assets. The HOA recovered about $200,000, which, combined with the insurance payout, left us short by only about $40,000 plus legal fees. We covered that shortfall by temporarily increasing monthly dues by $15 per household, which would be phased out once the deficit was eliminated. Marcus and I ran for re-election unopposed in May 2026. The annual meeting was peaceful and even boring, which felt like a victory in itself. People asked questions about budget priorities and common area maintenance schedules, normal, reasonable things that had nothing to do with drama or conflict. I still live in Meadowbrook Heights, and I still serve as HOA president, though I am training several other residents to take over leadership roles when I eventually step down. The neighborhood has changed for the better. People take care of their properties because they have pride in their homes, not because they fear violation notices. The HOA functions as it should, handling necessary community maintenance, enforcing genuinely important rules about safety and property upkeep, and otherwise staying out of people's lives. My lamppost stands in my front yard, glowing warmly every evening, a reminder of how a simple act of standing up for what was right led to uncovering corruption and ultimately improving an entire community. Sometimes I think about how different things would have been if I had just accepted the damage and moved on, if I had paid those unjust fines and let Deborah continue her reign of petty tyranny. But I did not accept it. I sent Craig a bill. I took the HOA to court, and I refused to be bullied into silence. Those decisions had consequences far beyond what I could have imagined that cold January morning when I found my lamppost lying broken in the snow. They led to an election, an audit, a criminal investigation, and ultimately justice for an entire neighborhood that had been exploited for years. Every evening when I come home from work, I see that lamppost glowing in my yard, and I am reminded that sometimes the smallest acts of resistance against injustice can spark changes that ripple far beyond their origins. I came to Meadowbrook Heights looking for a quiet place to call home. What I found instead was a community worth fighting for, and I discovered that I had the strength to stand up to bullies, even when it would have been easier to back down. Deborah Patterson stole money, but she also stole something less tangible and more precious. She stole the sense of community and mutual respect that should define a neighborhood. Getting her arrested and convicted was not revenge. It was accountability. It was about saying that no one, regardless of their position or how long they had held power, gets to abuse the trust placed in them. The lamppost incident seems almost trivial now compared to everything that followed, but it was the spark that lit the fire. It was the moment I realized that standing up for yourself matters, that documentation and evidence matter, that persistence in the face of opposition matters. If I had not taken those photographs, if I had not gotten Craig's written statement, if I had not filed that small claims case, Deborah would still be president of the HOA, still embezzling money, still terrorizing people over grass height and Christmas lights. Instead, she is in prison. The neighborhood is healing, and my lamppost glows every night as a beacon of what happens when ordinary people refuse to accept injustice. That is a better ending than I could have imagined that freezing January morning when this all began, standing in the snow, staring at broken glass and twisted metal, and deciding that I was not going to let this go. Sometimes the right thing to do is not the easy thing. Sometimes standing up for yourself means inviting conflict, criticism, and exhaustion. But it also means looking at yourself in the mirror and knowing you did not allow yourself to be victimized, that you fought for what was right even when others told you to let it go. I learned all of that because of a broken lamppost and an HOA president who thought she was untouchable. I learned that documentation is power, that truth matters, and that communities are only as healthy as the courage of their members to confront corruption and abuse. Meadowbrook Heights is home now, truly home, in a way it never could have been under Deborah's rule. My neighbors are friends, not adversaries. The HOA serves us instead of controlling us. And every single evening, my beautiful copper lamppost casts its warm light across my lawn, a permanent reminder that justice, however long it takes to achieve, is always worth fighting for. The whole journey, from that first shocking morning seeing the destruction in my yard, through the frustration of dealing with dishonest contractors and a vindictive HOA president, through the small claims hearing and the election campaign, and the discovery of massive embezzlement, taught me things about myself I had not known. I learned that I could be a leader when necessary. I learned that I could stand firm against intimidation. I learned that doing the right thing often means accepting short-term discomfort for long-term justice. And I learned that a home is not just a building you own. It is part of a larger community, and that community's health depends on people being willing to stand up when they see something wrong. If everyone in Meadowbrook Heights had stayed silent about Deborah's behavior, If we had all just accepted the petty tyranny and paid our unjust fines, she would have continued stealing for years, maybe decades. But one broken lamppost changed everything. One decision to document the damage, to pursue accountability, to refuse to be bullied, started a chain of events that freed an entire neighborhood from corruption. That is the power of individual action, of refusing to accept injustice, even in small matters, of understanding that how we respond to minor wrongs often determines whether major wrongs can flourish. I still work as an electrical engineer, still live in my 3-bedroom colonial, still check my mail without fear of violation notices. Life is good, normal, peaceful. But I carry with me the knowledge that peace and normalcy are not guaranteed. They exist because people are willing to fight for them when necessary, to stand up to bullies, to demand accountability from those in power. My lamppost glows every evening, and I smile every time I see it. It cost me $4,000 between the 2 installations, months of stress, countless hours of documentation and court preparation, and a year of intense conflict with my HOA. But it also gave me back my sense of agency, proved that ordinary people can challenge institutional corruption and win, and ultimately made my community a better place to live. That is a pretty good return on investment for a decorative light fixture. And every time someone new moves into Meadowbrook Heights and asks about the story behind the strict financial oversight and the revised bylaws, I tell them about the lamppost that changed everything. It has become part of neighborhood lore now, a reminder to everyone that we have the power to shape our community, that we do not have to accept abuse from those in authority, and that documentation and persistence can overcome even the most entrenched corruption. So yes, an HOA plow driver knocked over my lamppost. And yes, I sent him a bill that eventually got him fired. But more importantly, that single act of standing up for myself sparked a chain of events that exposed massive corruption, sent a criminal to prison, and freed my entire neighborhood from years of petty tyranny. Sometimes the smallest acts of resistance create the biggest changes, and sometimes a broken lamppost is exactly what a community needs to wake up and demand better from its leaders. That is the real story, and it is a story I am proud to have lived.